Greenwitch by Susan Cooper, Chapter 10. "Very good," said Merriman, watching as the Stantons' car hummed round the corner from the harbor and away into the main village street. They should just have time to get clear." "You make it sound as though somebody was going to drop a bomb," Simon said. Jane said nervously, "Gummery, what's going to happen?" "Nothing to you. Come along." Merriman swung round and began striding fast and long-legged across the quay toward the cottages. The children scurried after. "See you later, Mary," Captain Tom called. They stopped, turning in consternation. He was beginning to limp back to the grey house. "Captain, aren't you coming with us? Captain Tom's!" "Come along," Merriman said without feeling, and pushed them before him. They shot him quick glances of irritation or reproach. Only Will marched along without sign of emotion. "I'm so glad you're back." Jane slipped around her great-uncle's side. "Please, what's going to happen, really?" Merriman glanced down at her from his deep-shadowed eyes without slackening his pace. "The Greenwitch is abroad. All the power of the wild magic, which is without discipline or pattern, is let loose tonight in this place. The power of the light, since we have arranged it, will give protection to the cottages and to the grey house, but elsewhere, Truessic is under possession this night. It will not be an easy place." His deep voice was tense and grave, filling them with alarm. They trotted nervously at his side up the winding zigzag alleys and stairs to the cottage door. Then they fell into the lighted room like mice diving below ground from a hunting owl. Simon swallowed, regaining his breath, feeling slightly ashamed of his haste. He said belligerently to Will, "Where were you?" "Talking to people," Will said. "Well, what did you find out? You were gone long enough." "Nothing much," Will said mildly. "Nothing but what hasn't already happened." "Wasn't much point in your going, then, was there?" Will laughed. "Not really." Simon stared at him for a moment, then turned irritably away. Will glanced at Jane and winked. She gave him a quick, rueful grin, but studied him afterwards, behind his back. Simon wanted to quarrel, and you wouldn't, she thought. You're like a grown-up sometimes. Who are you, Will Stanton? She said, "Gummery, what should we do? Would you like Simon and me to keep watch upstairs?" "I should like you all to go to bed," Merriman said. "It's late." "Bed?" The outrage in Barney's voice was louder even than the others. "But everything's just getting really exciting." "Exciting is one word for it." Merriman's bony face was grim. "Later you might have another. Do as you're told, please." There was a flicking edge to the words that did not inspire argument. "Good night," said Jane meekly. "Good night, Will." "See you in the morning, everyone," Will said casually, and he disappeared into the Stanton half of the house. Jane shivered. "What's the matter?" Simon said. "Someone walked over my grave. I don't know. Perhaps I've caught a chill." "I'll make you all a hot drink and bring it up," Merriman said. Upstairs, Simon paused in the little corridor linking the bedrooms, clutching his head in a kind of despairing fierceness. "This is ludicrous, crazy. One minute we're in the middle of some awful great... watching that thing. And then Gummery turns up, and before you know it he's tucking us up with cups of cocoa." Barney gave a huge yawn. "Well, yes, but I'm tired." Jane shivered again. "I am too, I think. I don't know, I feel funny as if... Can you hear a sort of buzzing noise, very faint, a long way off?" "No," Simon said. "I'm sleepy," Barney said. "Good night." "I'm coming too," said Simon. He looked at Jane. "Are you going to be all right on your own?" "Well, if anything happens," Jane said, "I'm going to come running in and hide under your bed so fast you won't even see me." Simon managed a small grin. "You do that. There's one thing certain. Absolutely no one is going to get any sleep tonight." But when Merriman came tapping gently at Jane's bedroom door in a little while, there were 3 steaming mugs still on his tray. "I might have saved myself the effort," he said. "Simon and Barney are fast asleep already." Jane was sitting in pajamas and dressing gown beside the window looking out. She said without turning around, "Have you magicked them?" Merriman said softly, "No." Something in his voice made her turn then. He was standing in the doorway, his eyes glittering out of black pool shadow beneath the jutting white wire eyebrows. He stood so tall in the low little room that his bushy white hair touched the ceiling. "Jane," he said. Nothing has been done to any of you, or will be. I promised you that in the beginning. And no harm can come to you here. Remember that. You know me well enough. I do not put you into mortal danger, now or ever." "I know, of course I do," she said. "Then sleep sound," Merriman said. He stretched out a long arm, and she reached out and touched his fingertips. It was like a bargain. "Here, have some cocoa. No potions in it, I promise. Just sugar." Jane said automatically, "I've cleaned my teeth." Merriman chuckled. "Then clean them again." He put down the mug and went out, closing the door. Jane took her cocoa and sat beside the window again, warming her fingers on the hot, smooth sides of the mug. The room was cold. She looked out of the window, but the reflection of the bedside lamp was in her way. Impulsively, she reached out and switched it off, then sat waiting until her eyes grew accustomed to the dim-lit dark. When at last she could see again, she did not believe what she saw. From the cottage, high up there on the hillside above the sea, she had a clear view of all the harbor and much of the village. Here and there were pools of yellow light from the lamp-posts, 2 on the quayside, 3 across the harbor, up on the road past the gray house, others more distant at points within the village. But the pools of light were small, all else was darkness. And in the darkness, wherever she looked, Jane could see things moving. At first she could tell herself that she was imagining it, for whenever she saw movement from the corner of an eye and shifted her gaze to stare, it was gone. She could never see it clearly, in direct view, but this did not last for long. It was changed by a single figure of a man. He came out of the water at the edge of the harbor, climbing a flight of stairs, with a strange gliding motion. He was dripping wet, his clothes clung to him, his long hair was plastered flat and dark round his face, and as he walked, a trail of water dripped all round him, and was left like a path. He walked slowly up toward the main street of Truissic, looking neither to left nor right. When he came to the corner of the little canning factory, whose new extension jutted from the old brick building set higgledy-piggledy along the quay, the man in the wet clothes did not slow his pace nor turn aside. He simply walked through the wall as if it had not been there, emerging in a second or two on the other side. Then he disappeared into the darkness of the main street. Jane stared into the blackness. She said softly, desperately, "It's not true, it's not true." The night was very still. Jane clutched her mug like a talisman of reality, then suddenly jumped so hard she spilt half the cocoa on the window-sill. She had caught a movement right below her at the cottage door. Hardly daring to look, she willed her eyes to move downward and saw 2 figures leaving the door. Merriman was unmistakable, though he was hooded and muffled in a long cloak. Light from the street lamp showed Jane the high brow and fierce beak-like nose. But it was a moment before she realized that the second figure, cloaked and hooded in the same way, was Will Stanton. She knew him only by a trick of his walk, which until then she would not have thought she could recognize. They walked out unhurried into the middle of the quay. Jane felt a frenzied urge to throw open the window and shriek a warning to bring them back from unknown perils, but she had known her strange great-uncle too long for that. He had never been like other men. He had always had unpredictable powers, seemed somehow larger than anyone they had ever known. He might even be causing these things. "He is of the light," said Jane aloud to herself gravely, hearing the true impossible seriousness of the words for the first time. Then she said thoughtfully, amending it a little, "They are of the light." She looked at the smaller hooded figure, discovering in her mind a curious reluctance to believe that there was anything supernatural about Will. His cheerful round face with blue-gray eyes and straight mouse-brown hair had seemed a subtly comforting image from the beginning of this adventure. There would be nothing very comfortable about Will if he were like Merriman Lyon. And then she forgot Merriman, Will, and everything around her, for she caught sight of the lights. They were the lights of a ship out at sea, bright lights like stars moving a little with the waves. They swayed and bobbed out there in the darkness, but they were far too close in. Though they were clearly the lights of a ship of some size, they were close to the rocks of Kamar Head, dreadfully, dangerously close. She heard voices crying faintly. One of them seemed to call, "Jack Harry's lights!" And forcing her gaze away from the sea, she saw that the harbor was suddenly filled with people Fishermen, women, boys, running and waving and pointing out at the sea. They crowded past and around the still figures of Merriman and Will, as if neither of them was there. Then there seemed to Jane to be a strange blurring of the scene, a moment's vagueness. When her eyes cleared, everything was as it had been the moment before. And though she thought that the crowd of villagers seemed somehow different in clothes and appearance, she could not be certain. Before she could think further, horror seemed to take hold of the crowd. An eerie flickering light grew over the harbor, and suddenly boats set about, with great flaming torches, were pouring in fast. The harbor wall, strange broad boats were pouring in past the harbor wall, strange broad boats full of oarsmen, some bareheaded, with flowing red hair, some wearing stubby helmets crested with golden boar, and jutting out into the fierce iron nose-guard of the face. The boats reached shallow water. The oarsmen leapt from their oars, seized swords and blazing torches, and tumbled out, crowding, splashing, rushing ashore with blood-curdling yells that Jane could hear with dreadful clarity, even through the closed window. The villagers scattered, screaming, fleeing in all directions. Some few fought the invaders off with sticks and knives, but the red-headed men were intent on one thing only. They hewed and hacked with their swords, slicing at any they could catch with more fearsome brutality than Jane had ever believed possible in human beings. Blood ran bright over the quayside and streamed down into the sea, clouding out dark and murky in the waves. Jane stumbled to her feet, feeling sick, and turned away. When she forced herself back to the window, shivering, the screams and yells had died